All right, so good morning, everybody. Welcome back to day 3. You've survived, hopefully. It's been hopefully a lot of information that has come flying your way, but we are just super excited to be with you for our 3rd morning here. So a lot of you have asked us about the recordings of these meetings. So once we're completed with everything today, then we'll send the links off to somebody else. They'll turn it into a like YouTube video kind of thing, and then we'll get it posted, and we'll make sure you know where to find it and how to get to it. So we are working on that. We're just not gonna be tackling that for a couple more days. We just need to finish this up first. We should have a few guests popping in today. Bless you. Sorry. You don't always hear everything. So Becky's having a little issue with her computer still. So I don't think she's here with me, but she's not on the screen. So she's having a rough morning. So she's going to keep working on that. And then we're hopefully going to have Rick Trombley stop by at some point this morning. We have Brian Hawkins coming in a little bit. He's our director of government relations. He has a big long title, but I never know what it is. So and then we're starting with Rachel Hawkinson, who is one of our fabulous UDs, and she's out from the Nea-Nh region. So those of you who are in the Nea-Nh region, if you haven't met Rachel, you're about to, but we asked one of the UDs to come in and help us a little bit this morning to talk about advocacy. So I think that's one of the things that ends up being one of our biggest jobs is advocacy and grievances and the role in negotiations and how do we deal with issues that aren't necessarily in the contract. We usually hang out after our sessions, and so each day, and we had a few people asking us yesterday, like, how do you represent somebody who's not a member of the union, but they have a grievance? Like, what do you do in that case? So those are really great questions, and it's a really important topic. So we thought that if we were going to be talking briefly about the duty of fair representation, and hold on, I gotta let Becky in, there we go, and grievances and things along that nature, then it would be best if you heard from a UNICEF director, because that is a strength of theirs, sorry. And so we're gonna, I see Rachel's on there. I haven't seen her face yet. I'm thinking there she is, Rachel. So hold on, I'm still admitting people in. So Rachel, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us. We're just thrilled to have you. But I'm going to turn it over to you. If for those participants, you're in the gray portion of your packet, which is kind of where we left off. It starts with like contract enforcement, and I had shared those documents with Rachel, so she knew what you were going to be, what you had. And then Rachel, you're more of the expert than Becky and I, and we have been telling them, when in doubt, call UDs, call UDs, call UDs. You're like the heroes of our lives some days. So I'm going to turn it right over to you, and we'll help you facilitate with questions or anything else you need us to do. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Carolyn and Becky asked me to come on and talk about specifically the duty of fair representation, which is, you have some materials in your packet. And I thought it would be helpful to have, to be able to answer your questions about this, because it is a little bit of a thorny issue. And it's appropriate that it's in the gray portion of your packet, because there is a lot of gray area in this topic. That certainly, when in doubt, ask your UD. And this is also a legal issue. So our staff attorneys are going to be assisting you as well when you have questions about this. So typically, most UDs will ask you to go to the UD first before you go right to the attorney, because it just helps us manage our workflow a little better and stay organized so that we know who's talking to whom And so that we're not repeating work or, you know, giving you different perspectives and confusing you. So I think if you have a system in your local, when you have a question like this, the best system is to talk to your UD first. Your UD, if it's a legal issue, can consult with our legal counsel, our staff attorneys who are available to you. And we can also get all three of us together if that's helpful to brainstorm and look at issues. But I just want to highlight that the duty of fair representation is there's a legal standard. And there also might be language in your CBA that you need to check on. So once in a while, we see CBAs that have either in the non-discrimination portion of the CBA or in a separate provision of the CBA, a sentence to the effect that the union will not discriminate in its advocacy on the basis of union membership. So in other words, if a person comes to them who's in the bargaining unit that you technically represent, but they're not a dues paying union member, then you have certain legal duties that you have to take care of and address for them. But I'm going to hopefully give you some tips about how to sort out those situations and fulfill your legal duties and talk to those people who are, we reference them privately as freeloaders or free riders, people who are in your bargaining unit and who are represented by the union in its collective bargaining unit, but who are not dues paying members who don't support the union and then ask the union for help when they need it. Sometimes we make jokes like, I'm sorry your house burned down, but you don't have homeowners insurance, right? Like you can't go to the homeowners insurance company and say, I know I haven't been paying premiums all this time, but my house just burned down and so I would like you to pay to replace it. Well, that's not how it works. And so if you have someone that you represent that has a real transactional attitude like that, that's an analogy that we sometimes use. Like, well, I didn't want to pay for my union dues all these years, but now I'm in trouble and I want the union to help me. So you do, under some circumstances, have an obligation to help them, but I'm here to answer questions and give you sort of a broad perspective of what your legal responsibilities are. So we already talked about your CBA. Do check your CBA if you have someone that comes to you who's not a union member who's asking for help. You want to check to see if your CBA has the language that I just talked about that requires you to help them no matter what. And then also check the CBA to find out if they have a grievance. This is important because even if someone's not a member, if they are highlighting, if they have an issue that triggers some portion of your contract that you need to enforce, it's important for you to do that, not just because you have a legal obligation to do that, but because it might affect other union members or other people in the bargaining unit who are actually union members and who support the union. So if, for example, management is violating the contract and someone comes to you who's not a union member, says, I have this problem, I want the union to help me. They may or may not understand that that's an actual contract violation. So you do, in the first instance, have an obligation to go to your contract and figure out if it's a violation of the CBA, whatever they're complaining about. So that would be your step one. And you've gotten some information about grievances and how that system works. I'm not going to repeat that here, but definitely, check in with your grievance chair if you have a grievance committee, talk to your building reps, put your heads together, and determine if this problem is actually a violation of the contract. If it is, the union has a firm legal obligation to enforce the contract. I don't have a problem doing that on behalf of non-members for the sake of union members, because we have the saying, an injury to one is an injury to all, right? If management is violating the contract in the case of a non-member, then what's going to stop them from violating the contract on behalf of a member? And so you have an obligation to stop that behavior on management's part and make sure that you have send a clear message to management, whether it's through a grievance or another method, that you're going to enforce your contract, you're not waiving that right, and that if they ever try to do this again, there's going to be some standard that you've set up for them to enforce your contract. So by law, non-members have the right to file grievances. They can do it on their own. So this is separate from your grievance procedure in your contract. By law, anyone who's a member of the bargaining unit can file a grievance on their own without the union's assistance. But under state law, the union has a right to observe and to know what the resolution was if an individual files a grievance on their own without the support of the union. So in other words, this is a protection for you against direct dealing or against management making a settlement agreement with a non-member or a member who just doesn't want the union's help that is contrary to your CBA, that's prohibited by law, or is something that the union thinks is not appropriate. So, or something that doesn't actually resolve the contract enforcement issue. So if this individual and management come to a resolution that doesn't align with your CBA, or that the union is not satisfied actually enforces that provision of the contract the way you interpret it, you have the right to take it further. But that's where you would start. You would identify, is this a contract violation? Is it subject to a grievance? And then talk to this person and find out if they want the union to represent them in the grievance process, because they don't have to have the union participate under state law. They can go it alone. And I have found that some people who are not members, when we have that conversation with them and we just lay it out there and say, you know, we don't say we don't want to represent you because you're not a member, because you could be verging into that discrimination territory that we're going to talk about in a second. But have that conversation, say, we noticed that you're not a member of the union. You haven't been participating or supporting the union. So we're just asking you, do you want the union to do this work for you? And it's a little bit of a shame tactic on our part to say, like, do you really want to use our time that you haven't supported or paid for, or, you know, or wanted to have available to you to help you with your problem? Or do you want to help yourself with your own problem since you've decided not to participate in the union? So those choices are available to union members. Or excuse me, to non-members. If someone says, yes, I want the union to file this grievance for me, and I want the union to take care of my problem, then really get into the nitty-gritty with them about what that is going to entail, because it could go all the way up to arbitration, and there are costs involved with that, and the union has an obligation to pay for that. And you can say to them, you know, this could cost thousands of dollars to the union. Are you sure that you want to participate in this process? Because this could be a long haul. It could be an expensive process for us. And we're just asking you, we're not saying we're not going to do it. We're just asking you to understand what's involved in us facilitating a grievance on your behalf when you're not a member. And you can just lay it out there like that. It's important for you not to say, we don't want to file this grievance, or we're not going to enforce the contract on your behalf because you're not a member, because that actually does violate your duty of fair representation, which is your legal obligation to enforce the contract equally and without any discrimination for members and non-members alike. So if what I'm saying to you is confusing and you're not sure when you find yourself in this situation, this is a call your UD call, you know, maybe your UD consults with legal counsel if it's a tricky case. Because it's possible that it could come back to haunt the union if you give the impression that you're not going to help someone, or you don't want to help someone because they're not a union member. So,
Rachel?
Yep.
It's in a nutshell, like the way I always thought of it was, it's protecting the contract. It's
right.
Your rights, not necessarily the person bringing it forth, but protecting the rights of all and what's in their packet or their little booklet. I have a booklet. So if you think of it that way, it's protecting what's there for years to come and years that have gone by too. So
yeah, exactly. It's defending your contract, right?
Right.
So if the person that you're working with does not want to file a grievance, or they want to do it on their own, and you're afraid that they're going to take some sort of position on the contract that's contrary to the union's interpretation of the contract, you have another alternative, which is to either write on your own or work with your UD to draft a notice to management that says, we understand there's been this contract violation. Here's our interpretation of the contract. We're putting you on notice. This is our position. And whatever this person says to you, whether it agrees with our position or not, this is the position that we think is enforceable. And so it's important to have that in writing so that it, you know, whatever happens with that person in the future doesn't set a precedent. And, you know, sometimes that's all we do for non-members because they have said to us, actually, I don't want to file a grievance, or I don't want to, I don't want you to represent me or advocate for me because either I'm embarrassed that I'm not a member, or I just don't want anything to do with the union because, I'm not a member because I don't like the union, whatever the reasons are. If you've identified a contract violation, it's important to either file a grievance or put management on notice in writing, document your position and say, you did a bad thing, never do it again. And if you do it again, we're going to enforce the contract using our interpretation of the contract. And it's really important to get that documented. So those are sort of the CBA provisions that we want you to be aware of. The union, just to summarize, the union has an obligation to enforce the CBA on behalf of members and non-members alike, but there are different ways for you to do that, right? So when I say enforce the CBA, I'm being really literal, and it's just the provisions that are written down in the CBA that you have an obligation to enforce on behalf of non-members. As you know, there are lots and lots of problems that we help members with that are not within the boundaries of the CBA. So for instance, if there's an FMLA issue, if there's an ADA issue, any legal issue that is not specified in your CBA, if there's for certified employees, if there's a code of conduct issue, so in other words, if somebody has been referred to the DOE for a code of conduct investigation, that squarely falls under law and not your contract. And so that is something that we would not represent a non-member in. Same thing with if you have teachers who are being laid off or dismissed under the terms of 189.14a. You might have a grievance procedure in your contract where they want to file a grievance on that if you feel that the grievance has merit. But if they're just going to have a hearing in front of the school board and maybe go to the Board of Ed under the statute, so if they're just invoking their statutory rights to a hearing, we will not help a non-member with that, because that's a statutory right that they have to enforce on their own. Maybe they hire their own attorney or just do it by themselves. But we will not, our attorneys or UDs will not go to a dismissal hearing or a non-renewal hearing for someone that is just challenging that under 189.14a or 189.13, which is the dismissal statute. So there might be some areas where your contract and the law intersect, right? So we just talked about dismissals. If it's a teacher dismissal, then there is a law that goes along with that, or a teacher non-renewal, there's a law that goes along with that. We're not going to help them with that law part, but if there's a violation of your CBA, then we would, if they asked, have to help them with that CBA enforcement. And sometimes those things are merged together, like with a non-renewal sometimes, or a dismissal. So that's where you want to talk with your UD, maybe talk with one of our attorneys and sort out, is this just a contract issue, or is there a legal aspect to it, and how are we going to enforce the contract? If it's both, how are we going to enforce the contract and not give this person rights that they're not entitled to under law if it's a legal obligation or a legal right that they have. So your grievance committee is going to be really important here. If you have one, your grievance officer, whoever is responsible for overseeing the union's activity in grievance processing, because you want to really make a firm determination that there is a portion of your contract that is in play here. And also that your grievance committee agrees that the grievance that this person wants to file has merit. So we just talked about you having an obligation under the law to enforce the contract. That does not mean that if someone wants to file a grievance that you think doesn't have any merit, that you have to go through with that. So if someone who's a non-member comes to you and says, here's how I interpret the contract, here's how I want it to be enforced on my behalf, you still have the independent judgment to look at the contract, look at the facts of their case, and make a determination about whether you think there's actually a violation of the contract, you meaning the grievance committee or whoever's responsible in your local for making those decisions. And if there's a disagreement between the person who wants to file the grievance and your grievance committee about how to interpret and apply the contract, your grievance committee has the authority to say to that person, look, we've understood your situation, we've looked at the facts, we've looked at the contract, we don't agree with you that this grievance has any merit and we're not going to file it. You're absolutely within your rights to do that. So that's an important caveat when you're talking about contract enforcement, that it's the union that gets to decide whether or not there is a violation, not the individual. Does that make sense? All right. Questions at this point? I've just talked really fast about a lot of things. People probably have examples from their own locals where this has come up.
I have a question, Rachel.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I was looking up what 189.14A was, and I missed what you said about it. So is 189.14A then that's not because it's not a violation of a contract? That's something that we wouldn't represent a non-member, or we would represent? I missed that.
That's a good question. Sorry, I was talking so fast.
No, that's okay.
189.14A is the teacher non-renewal statute. So that's the statute that says that teachers, if they have more than 5 years of service in the district, are entitled to due process if they're non-renewed, notice and due process. So if that is the only thing that you're being asked to enforce on behalf of a non-member, we do not have to represent them, and we will not represent them in a hearing if it's just a statutory hearing. But you got to go back to your CBA and look at your CBA and say, does this circumstance trigger any provision of the CBA that we need to enforce? And like Carolyn pointed out, it's better if you do find a provision of the CBA that has been violated, it's really important to enforce that, not necessarily because you want to help this person who's a non-member, but because it could be precedent setting and affect your entire membership. So going forward, you don't want management to say, well, we did this before to this person and you didn't file a grievance, so that must mean that you agree with our conduct or you agree with our interpretation of the contract, and we're going to try to hold that against you later. So whether or not you file a grievance or just send a written notice to the administration that you disagree with their actions and that you're not waiving your right to enforce this provision of the CBA going forward, take a look at how those things intersect. Same thing with dismissal. So 189.13 is the statute that allows school districts to dismiss teachers for insubordination, for immorality, whatever that means, for incompetence, right? So those are sort of the broad umbrellas of things under the state statute for which teachers can be dismissed. Take a look at your CBA, and if you have just cause provision in your CBA, if you have a discipline provision in your CBA that's been violated, then you would want to file a grievance or otherwise put management on notice that you disagreed with their actions and that you think it violated the contract, even if you're not going to assist that person with a statutory dismissal hearing. The dismissal hearing under 189.13 is in front of the school board. And then, it can be appealed from there. So that's a great question.
I think,
Other questions?
I'm sorry, I think Lisa had a question too.
Okay.
I do, thanks. You said earlier, I'm pretty sure you said that your contract will have language whether or not you're non-members, whether or not you represent your non-members. Is that what you said?
It might. So the law is, and the law is based on it's based on the Public Employee Labor Relations Act, but also has been refined through case law, through case decisions, says that you have an obligation to enforce the contract without discrimination on the basis of union membership. So that's the law. Your contract may have more specific and narrower language that you have to follow, or that I would advise you to follow your contract, that is even more precise than that makes you have a more narrow legal obligation than what's under the statute.
Okay, sorry.
And that's a great segue into my next point, unless people have other questions.
So it may not have any language like that at all about.
Yeah, it may or may not. So check your own contract.
Thank you.
Thought I saw a hand up, but I can't see all of your smiling faces. So
Can I just jump in here?
yeah.
One thing that I don't know if people know, that I did not know this, that a person that doesn't pay dues, ran into a problem. This happened to myself, but ran into a problem at school. And then she did ask to join at that time. I didn't realize that they can join at a prorated rate, of course, but she did join, and then we represented her like any other union member. But that's kind of how that went.
Yeah, so that's a segue into another. You guys are anticipating all my points. You're so smart. So when that happens, Linda said someone joined when they got in trouble, right? When they needed help was the time that they joined. If they've never been a member before, they can certainly join at the prorated rate. If they've been a member and dropped their membership, then there are different rules that apply to the proration of dues. But it's important for that person to understand that if they want to be represented by one of our attorneys in a legal matter, or if they want to access the liability insurance that comes along with their union membership, they are not going to get those benefits if they join after the problem has already occurred. So for instance, if they're being disciplined or potentially, facing some legal repercussions for some conduct that they've been accused of, if they're joining after the fact, so after the incident that triggered the discipline, or after the incident that triggered the code of conduct complaint, their membership is not retroactive. Those benefits of having legal representation, having the liability insurance cover them, is not retroactive to the time that the event occurred or the time that the incident occurred that is causing their problem, right? It's prospective. So if someone is joining expecting one of our attorneys to represent them, or for the liability insurance to protect them, this happens sometimes when people are accused of crimes, right? Because our liability insurance does cover the cost of a criminal attorney representing someone if they are exonerated or if they're not charged. But only if they were a member on the date of the incident for which they're being charged, right? So they can't backdate their membership to cover an incident that already happened before they joined. Does that make sense? So not that they shouldn't join, and we still encourage them to join, and there's some ways that we can help them afterwards, but NEA has a specific policy that governs this because they pay for the time of our attorneys through the Duchesne Fund. And so they will not pay for that work if the work is to cover an incident that occurred before the person was a member. So that's a really important thing for non-members to understand. And it's important for you to tell them that and explain that to them if they're joining after the fact, because you're not trying to hide anything from them. You're welcome to join, right? We're glad to have you as a member, but it's just important for you to know that you can't roll this back to the time that the incident occurred. We'll still enforce the contract on your behalf, just like we would otherwise, but if you're looking for an attorney, or if you're looking for assistance with something outside the contract, like a criminal complaint, like a code of conduct complaint, that's not going to be covered if you joined after the incident. And like I said, there's often some overlap, right? So if someone is accused of a code of conduct violation, they may be disciplined for that, and there may be a discipline provision in your CBA that you think has been violated that you want to enforce on behalf of that person, because it matters for everyone. So, it's helpful, I find, to actually talk through these issues with someone else to kind of sort it out before you make decisions, because it can be complicated. And there's often overlap between your contract and the law. But if it's something straightforward, like someone's asking for ADA accommodations and they're not getting what they want, that's something that our unit of served directors and attorneys help with all the time for members only, because that is only covered by by federal law and not by your contract. I want to, because I'm sensitive to the time, just say to you, what are the potential consequences if you violate your duty of fair representation? Someone who's not a member could potentially bring a lawsuit against the union, so it would be against the local and us as your affiliate, for failing to represent them adequately or fairly, or for discriminating against them under the law because they were not a member. Couple comments about that. Number one, it's a very bold move to go through the hassle of filing a lawsuit against someone that you've been freeloading off of for your career, and then go to them and say, well, you didn't do a good enough job, providing this free service that I never paid for and didn't want until I got in trouble, right? So I'll just have to say my opinion about that. Number two, you have an obligation to represent them in enforcing your contract. And that it doesn't mean that you have to be successful, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to win the grievance. It doesn't mean that you have to get them what they wanted in the grievance. It doesn't mean that you can't have a different interpretation of the contract than they did. You just have to make a good faith effort to enforce the contract on their behalf. Doesn't matter whether you win or lose in terms of your meeting your legal obligation to enforce the contract on their behalf. You don't have to get the outcome that they wanted, that this non-member wanted, in order to meet your obligation. And in terms of assessing whether their grievance had any merit, like I said, your grievance committee has the authority to use its judgment to make those decisions. And if that decision is different from what how the non-member interpreted the contract, that's okay, you've met your obligation. So if they are insisting that they have a grievance and your committee is saying, we don't see that has any merit in terms of a contract violation, so we're not going to file a grievance, that's okay. But you do want to be really taking up an honest look at the contract and not just saying, well, we disagree with you because you're not a member and we don't want to represent you. Really take a close look at your contract, decide if you think it actually has been violated, and go from there. So I just said that the union could get sued. It's not the kind of lawsuit where there would be, like, you're not going to go to court, right? You're not going to be called to, you're not going to be put in jail, right? So you're not going to be individually punished for this. As an individual, it would be a suit against the union, not the grievance officer or the president as an individual. Any in New Hampshire would represent your local in this dispute. And so, our attorneys would be called in to help you. And so I just said you wouldn't have to appear in court. You might have to appear as a witness, but you wouldn't be individually named as a grievance. A side note, it is important for your union to be established as a nonprofit corporation so that it is an entity in and of itself. And so that the assets of people who are running your local organization are not ever left exposed in a lawsuit like this. So that's just one more good reason to keep your nonprofit status up and running and up to date, because that is what makes the individuals who are running your organization protected against any kind of claim against them individually. So there is also a possibility that someone could try to file an unfair labor practice complaint against your local if they felt that there was a violation of your duty of representation. That's less likely to happen. It could happen, but it's much less likely because typically unfair labor practice complaints can only be filed by the employer or the union, because they are the parties to the contract. And they are the entities, the union and the employer, that are governed by our Labor Relations Act statutes. So under limited circumstances, there is a possibility that someone could try to file an unfair labor practice charge against the union as an individual for violating their duty of fair representation, but they probably would not have standing to do that. But again, talk with your UD. I don't want you to be scared about approaching these problems. I just want you to be aware of what your legal obligations are so you can do it right and you don't run into trouble.
Rachel, can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
Well, I usually do anyways. You know me well enough. I know
You
we've
don't
worked
have to
together
ask,
long
do
enough
it.
by now. It's in there. It's got to come out. And the first thing having been a local president for a number of years prior to this, it sometimes when we talk about these things, and it gets a little scary
Mhm.
for local leaders, because then you start thinking, oh my God, what am I got myself into? it's the courage piece that we talked about yesterday, but really, truly, you just need to reach out to your UNICEF directors, because that's what they're there for. If you're not sure, even if it's something, what I used to do is, I would send, if it's something that even I could handle, I would always send my UD an email and say, this is what's happening, this is how I plan to handle it, just to keep them in the loop, so they're aware of things. And then it, in turn, it kind of helps you in negotiations. Because if you're finding you're constantly trying to grieve something, then it needs to be addressed in the contract maybe. So my question is this, how do you handle, sometimes our districts do stupid things, not the members, the administrators, and they come out with these weird like things that they think are wonderful, but it's not actually in the contract, but it goes against like everything we've always done prior. How do you handle something, how do you grieve something that's not in the contract?
That's a great question.
Hard one.
Yeah, and the answer is it depends, right? That's usually the answer to the question. But if there is a benefit that management has been providing to people that's not specified in your contract, under certain circumstances that can be enforceable, even if it's not mentioned in your contract. So, if they've been paying a differential, or if they've been, providing any kind of a benefit, like a comp day or something like that for conferences, and they want to stop doing that, they want to discontinue that practice, then talk with your UD, but it might be an enforceable past practice, even if it's not mentioned in your contract. If it's a practice that the parties have been in agreement on through their conduct over time. So that's sort of the key usually to past practice enforcement, is both parties have to be aware of it, meaning the union, not just random employees, but the union has to be aware of it and acknowledge it. Management has to be aware of it and acknowledge it. And they have to have been continuing that practice over some period of time. And there's not a threshold in the law as to when you've met the time, specific time period to make an enforceable past practice. It depends. One time is definitely not enough, but after that, it depends on the circumstances, whether they've done it enough time or over enough a long enough period of time for it to be enforceable. So sometimes it can be helpful to talk with your non-members if there is a practice that you're curious about, if you need to do some research before filing a grievance to find out if a past practice exists that is legally enforceable that you want to take action to enforce. You could certainly talk with your non-members and ask them, have you been receiving this benefit? Have you been receiving this comp day or whatever it is? Because you're entitled to all that information, even if they're not members. But Carolyn brought up negotiations. It's really important to limit your contact about negotiations to union members only. And once in a while, we'll have a non-member come to us and say, well, you represent me, so I have a right to participate in negotiations. I've even had one try to show up at the bargaining table who wasn't a member. But the superintendent was like, yeah, come on over. They represent you. You're invited to the meeting, and he invited him. And I was like, get out of here. You don't have any right to participate in this process, and we're not going to allow it, because negotiations, communications, even though you're negotiating a contract that is going to impact all of your bargaining unit members, not just your union members. Non-members do not have a right to participate in that process. They don't have a right to vote on the contract when it's settled. They don't have a right to give you their feedback about what they want in the contract. They don't have a right to any updates about negotiations. They don't have a right to any of that. And that's a firm line that I think is really important to hold, because once in a while you have someone say, well, this contract covers me, so I have a right. No, you don't. No, you don't. When you are negotiating, it's important to never say out loud or put in writing or think the thought that we want to negotiate preferential treatment or benefits or compensation for union members versus non-members, because that would be a violation of your duty of fair representation, because it's not just contract enforcement, although that's where it usually comes up. It's contract negotiations as well. So you should not be in negotiations in your salary spreadsheet giving raises to union members and not to non-members, right? So that's a real black and white example. But when it comes down to ratification, if you are counting votes, if you are looking at the settlement and saying like, I really hope this passes. I mean, hopefully you've got an awesome settlement that is going to pass with flying colors because everyone's going to be so excited to see it. But if it's been a tough negotiations and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to pass, certainly count votes among your members only, right? So before you bring a contract to ratification, if you're not exactly sure it's the best thing, then look at how it impacts your members because they're the ones who are going to be voting on it. I realize I just sounded like I was talking out of both sides of my mouth, but that's part of the nuance that you have to think about when you're bargaining is you can't discriminate in your settlements or in your proposals on the basis of union membership, but union members are the only ones who are going to be voting on it. And their input is the only input that matters. Their feedback is the only feedback that matters. I have a situation in one of my locals where we're bargaining right now and management wants to change the health insurance plan. And so we're going to have the health insurance carrier come in and make a presentation and do a Q&A about the plans. And we're at the table with management and their attorney says, so let's do this on the, like one of the workshop days on back to school and everyone can come. And, and I said, not everyone can come. Not everyone can come because it has to be only union members who are exposed to this information because they're the only ones who are entitled to participate in negotiations. And so, first of all, we would never invite non-members because it's union business only, but also it would be a total waste of their time because their opinion doesn't matter because they're not going to be voting on this. So, and I said it just like that to the attorney and she was like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. So we're going to have the presentation in our union meeting instead. But, it's important for everyone at the table to know that even though the contract affects everyone in the bargaining unit, it's only union members who are ultimately entitled to an opinion about it and a vote.
So Rachel, we got in an interesting conversation at some point over the last 2 days. They're all kind of blurring together. And first of all, when you talked about this group asking questions that leads you right into the next thing, they have been so accommodating with helping Becky and I navigate the last 2 days because that's what they do. They're full of questions and they're an awesome group. But we got into a conversation about how there are times where your non-paying members, the freeloaders are potential members. So, and they're your colleagues, and in some cases, they're your friends and acquaintances. Mm-hmm. So there are times where the non-members tend to have ideas for you of how to run your association. Sometimes they're really good ideas. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, dang, that's a good idea. So a couple of people were having trouble with how do you respectfully, we know we have to represent them to some degree to protect the contract. Mm-hmm. But this isn't even a grievance. It's just they're constantly coming at you with ideas and ways that they think you should run your association. But yet when they've asked them to join, it's well, no, thank you kind of thing. So how do you deal? I don't know if you have any tips. We offered what we've done, Becky and I've done and other people have done and how to deal with that, but they are colleagues, they are friends. And it's when you come in, it can be, I'm going to say you can be more of a jerk, and please don't take that the wrong way, but because you're an outsider to some degree, so you can come out and say point blank, boom, here it is. Whereas we have to work with these people day in and day out. So is there tips or tricks of the trade that you could offer us? And if there's not, just say no.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that you always want to leave the door open to joining, right? So, the hard conversations that I talked about at the beginning of this conversation, saying are you sure you want the union to use its paid staff and use paid resources to represent you, or, you have the option to do it on your own. You know these people better than we do, right? So you know, we can lay out for you what are your legal obligations, what are your choices, but you're the ones who actually have to usually have those one-on-one conversations with your colleagues who are not members, who you're going to see at lunch. You know, I don't know if you're allowed to eat lunch together anymore, but used to be like you'd see them on lunch duty, right? Or you see them on bus duty, or you're going to see them in the staff meeting. And so, yeah, you can certainly use your judgment in how you have those conversations. We don't have a script for you. And sometimes, you know, I've run into situations where someone sincerely thought they were a member. And so of course they're going to the union for help. And when we say, well, we don't have a membership record of your membership, and they're like, oh my God, I thought I was a member. You know, that's a little bit hard to believe that someone thought they were a member when they never paid dues. But, you know, sometimes they do. It used to be more common that we'd get that misunderstanding when we were allowed to have agency fees. And the purpose of the agency fee or the representation fee was that if someone didn't want to join the union could still bargain to charge them some amount of money out of their paycheck to cover the costs of enforcing and bargaining the contract. And then, you know, it was a little harder to turn someone away when they're like, well, I've been paying my fee all this time, even though I'm not a member and I don't support the union. But that's not allowed anymore. So, you know, sometimes we say to, like, if it's a sensitive issue, I might suggest just pointing out that they're not a member, right? And that can be a little passive. You could say, oh, we don't have you on our membership list. I don't see your name on the membership list. And then just wait a minute and see how they respond. You know, sometimes I'll send an email and say, you know, I'm checking through our records and we don't have a record of you being a member. Has there been some kind of a mistake? You're asking for a heavy lift here. So we want to make sure that our records are correct and I don't see your name on the roster. You know, maybe you changed your name. Maybe, yeah, like we lost the form.
We spent time with Janice talking about, you know, reconciling your membership list with your bills and all of that. And one of the things, and that's why it's just another reason to make sure that you have an accurate membership list for your local, because it's not just the finances, it's then who are you representing and who is a member. So you hit it. That's a really important. I just wanted to bring that back to yesterday, because that is something that we spoke about quite a bit. So
yeah, that's really important. And, you know, the fact that they're not a member is not something that you have to highlight to management. When you know, we've had non-members who have decided to go on their own, we just don't show up, right? And so, you know, like I had someone a few years ago who was not a member. We checked that he had been non-renewed. We checked the contract. There wasn't anything in the contract, the CBA, that we could enforce on his behalf. It was just going to be a pure statutory hearing. And he just showed up at the school board meeting on his own, and they were like, where's Rachel? And he said, she's not here. She's not coming. And so, you know, like, I think he had to tell them, I'm not a union member, so I don't get the union staff representing me. But, you know, it was a total disaster and he didn't get a good outcome. Not that, you know, I'm promising that I would have gotten his job back if he had me there, but certainly hearing would have gone better.
I love it when school boards and administration like start asking, like, where's Rachel? Where's Lori? Where's like they just assume that like you're part of us, like you're part of the gang and you're always there representing and supporting us. So it's always kind of funny when they bring up like, where is this person? So
yeah. And it, you know, and you can, if someone's not a member, sometimes it's to the local's advantage to show up for them anyway. If you have the kind of relationship with management where you're interested in showing a really strong front, right? So if you want management to think that every single person that works for them is a union member, and you have a real, you know, like you have 100% membership, then show up for everybody. I mean, there could be strategic reasons why you might represent non-members if it's for the benefit of the larger membership. One other note that it's a trap for the unwary. Make sure, like Carolyn said you're checking your membership roster to make sure that everyone agrees who's a member, but also be checking your bargaining unit certification regularly to make sure that you understand who's represented. Because once in a while, we come across cases where, like it's a majority teacher bargaining unit and the occupational therapist didn't think that they were represented by the union because they're not a teacher, but they actually are in the bargaining unit. And so they didn't get the assistance that they needed, or they weren't offered membership because people weren't really understanding that they were represented. But according to the certification of the PELRB, their position is represented. And so they should have been offered membership and advocated for in negotiations and in enforcement. So just be really on point about which positions are represented. Because certainly if it's not a represented position, you don't have any legal obligation at all, because they can't even, they couldn't join if they wanted to. But that is a mistake that some of our folks have made, because they just didn't realize which positions were actually in their unit or not.
Great. I see Lisa has her hand up.
In regards to this last piece, are those positions defined, you said PELRB, by them or in our contract?
That is a really smart question to ask. So there should be a provision in your contract that's called a recognition clause, and it might either list the positions that are represented. It might describe the positions that are represented by just saying like all professional employees except principals or something like that. Or it might refer to the bargaining unit certification on file at the PELRB. So it might say like all employees represented according to decision number, blah, blah, blah at the PELRB. The PELRB certification is what controls who's in what positions are in your bargaining unit. So no matter what your contract says, it is the PELRB certification that controls that. So you always want to be making sure that your contract either matches the PELRB certification or refers to it. Because not everyone remembers to go and look at the certification on file at the state to make sure that they understand. We have run into cases where unions represented in practice positions for years and years, like 30 years, but nobody ever updated the PELRB certification to reflect that those positions were in the bargaining unit. And when it was challenged by management, we lost that case because no one had ever changed the unit certification to include those positions. So legally, we actually never represented them, even though we've been bargaining for them and they've been getting all the benefits of the contract. When management figured that out, they were like, oh, you can take them out. So it's a real easy process. If you find any discrepancy between who you think you represent according to your conduct or your contract and what's in the PELRB certification, it's just a matter of paperwork. There's a filing that your UNICERF director can do. If there's a disagreement between management and the union about who they want represented in the unit, and when I say who, I mean not the people, but the positions, what positions they want to be included, then there's a process that we can go through to have the PELRB resolve that dispute one way or another. We can go to a hearing and get some help with that. Usually it's by agreement. Sometimes it's done during contract negotiations, or like if a new position is invented or a new position is brought into the district that didn't exist before, then it's a good practice to take a look at that and say, is this a position that belongs in the bargaining unit? And do we agree with management about that? And can we just file the paperwork, or do we want to have a hearing to have the PELRB decide? And those
Patrick has a question, and then I know there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just had a question, Rachel. So hypothetically speaking, let's say that at a new teacher orientation, one of the individuals running the program said something that could be considered disparaging about the union, or has disparaged the association. Would that be considered legally an unfair labor practice because it's a new teacher orientation that would be run by the district? Is that in legal terms an unfair labor practice?
Potentially. So there is a provision under state law that prohibits employers from interfering in the administration of the union. And that has been interpreted to include conduct that discourages union membership or union participation. So, if you have anyone in management saying, well, don't join the union, those are, they're nasty thugs, you don't want to be involved with that or whatever, or you're better off not joining the union, giving any opinion that is anti-union, talk to your UD, because that could be considered an unfair labor practice that is prohibited. Because it could be construed as interfering in the administration of the union by discouraging participation or discouraging membership. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Rachel, we also had a question in the chat. It says, if OT/PT school psychologists are paid as consultants, are they part of the bargaining unit?
So if your PLRB certification either lists those positions or describes them, saying, like professional employees or salaried employees, and any description that would include those positions, then do talk to your UD, because there could be a violation there, that the district is contracting out bargaining unit work. If your bargaining unit certification doesn't explicitly or by description cover those positions, then it makes a difference whether they are district employees, so employed and paid directly by the district, or if they're contracted out from a private provider. If they're not in your bargaining unit and they're contracted out, you can't represent them because they're not district employees, and you can only represent positions that are directly employed by your same employer. So it depends on whether they're contracted out properly or improperly. And we have seen a couple of cases where districts traditionally contracted out those services, but then they realized it'd be a better deal for them to employ them directly. And that's when we would ask the membership, ask those people whether they thought that those positions should be included in the bargaining unit and represented under your contract. Does that answer the question? I feel like I went a little sideways.
When in doubt, check your recognition clause and call your UD, right?
Right.
Like, when in doubt, reach out and email or call your UD. We cannot stress that enough. And I think one of the things is inexperienced leaders is there's a lot of things that you're not sure of. You're never alone. You truly are never alone. Do never shy away and worry, well, will Rachel think this is a stupid question? Rachel's going to answer your question. Lori's going to answer your question. Chris will answer your question. All your UDs, that's what they're there for. And they're wonderful about it. There's so many times where, like, I'll be meeting with one of them or chatting and they just ask a question. I'm like, well, you know what? I didn't look at it that way. They have a whole different perspective than we do because we're in the thick of things, but they understand that. So they're gentle about it too. Like they're all really like sweet people. So when in doubt, please reach out to them. There's nothing wrong with asking a question. And I said this earlier this week, that as a young leader and being a younger teacher way back then, 35 years ago, I always looked at, for no particular reason, I don't know why, but I always looked at asking for help as a weakness. And it wasn't, and it's not. It took me a while to figure out that asking for help was being intelligent. And it was, okay, I don't know the answer. I need to get the information. And so my UD is usually the one, and sometimes we stump them. It's not often. They've seen a lot, but every once in a while, a district will do something new and they're like, wait a minute, we'll get back to you. And they do. They're wonderful. So please, please, please never shy away from reaching out. Rachel, we have Brian online. I don't know if you saw, he popped in as well. We want to say thank you. And we want to invite you back for next year. If you wouldn't mind to do this part with us again, like we were just talking, we're like, this is the best thing we ever did because you understand this. You're the expert in this area. We can talk about it from experience, which is helpful. But really, truly, we can't thank you enough for volunteering to come in and spend an hour with our great little group here of newer leaders. And I'm sure they will reach out to you or their own UDs with as many questions as possible. Be prepared. This is a question year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's very
I
exciting.
love it. And I appreciate being included because this like this work makes me light up. And I love hearing your questions. And this is what I do all day long because I love it so much. So, and all the UDs feel the same. So we are so delighted to get your questions. Ask us all the questions because it just makes us so happy. I love being able to help you.
That, and they know what's going on in your local, and that's important.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like
That's
it
another-
really is.
I realize I'm over my time, so I'm not gonna stay on past my welcome. But the more communication you have with us, the better. So please do not be shy. It helps us do our best work when we know what's going on. So even if it's just quick little updates, like I just want to put this on your radar, but like even if you're not asking for help, just keeping us in the loop about what's going on in your local helps us do our best work. Because we can be a lot more nimble and efficient when a problem does arise and you're like, oh, I understand that situation. I know what questions to ask, what information I need to give you my best advice. So,
And please, a lot of the UDs show up at their your regional council meetings. And that's a great place to get to know them and to just share little tidbits and see what else is going on. So we encourage all our leaders to attend your regional council meetings because you'll find your UD there as well. They're everywhere. Okay.
the union never sleeps, right?
No, it does not. 24/7,
This is our day job.
365.
Yeah, this is our day job and our night job. So, this is what we're here for. This is our whole entire job is to help you. So never be shy about asking for help.
So thank you, Rachel. We appreciate your time and we'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Okay,
Because
thank you.
we're
Nice
always
to talk with
around.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Let's take, Brian, do you mind if we just give them like 5 minutes to go get more coffee and to like stand up and stretch a little bit before we hop on to you?
Not at all. Go for it.
All right, so guys, 10:08. All right.
It's important to be fully caffeinated for my section on this.
Hey, everybody. So I'd like to, we're going to get started again. Sorry that it went a little over. The next person we have for you is Brian Hawkins. He's our fabulous government relations director. And he's going to talk to you about all things like, did I say legislative, Brian, and things like that?
Exactly,
Stuff that
yeah.
makes your head go.
Yeah, thanks, Becky, and thanks both you and Carolyn for inviting me to come speak today. I'm hoping to talk a little bit, but also have some questions and or discussion if people have them. So this year has been a sort of a tale of two cities for our in the wake of the 2020 election. We had in Washington, we've actually seen quite a bit of increase in support for public education. The American Rescue Plan included one of the single biggest investment in public education in decades, and as well as getting Betsy DeVos out of being Secretary of Education. We now have a much more supportive education secretary. We're encouraged about more things to come. And it's not just related directly to schools, but we also got the increase in the child tax credit, which they anticipate to cut child poverty in half. And hopefully in the next budget resolution coming up, they'll be able to make that permanent, so people have the opportunity to have better access to childcare and for working families. And so there's a lot of things to be excited about at the federal level. And then there's the state level, which everybody, which has been totally different. For the class we did on Friday, I saw a couple of people who were in it. We talked a little bit about sort of the lay of the land being, we had Governor Sununu obviously reelected, which meant we got a renomination of our education commissioner, Frank Edelblut. So he was able to re-up his term this year. We also, saw the State Board of Education, some of the policy making education folks in the state, that has become, because the governor has had a very favorable executive council, they haven't really been much of a check on his choices for the state board, let alone the education commissioner. And so we've gotten a state board that has pretty much been a rubber stamp for what the commissioner wants to do. And then we've had the legislature, which also flipped in the election, and that has been, I think, a surprise, particularly in the House, because it's really been a new brand of leadership. It's not just that the legislature changed parties and who is in the majority. It's more of who is the new influencers and leadership blocks in those in those majorities, in those specifically the Republican majorities. And in the House, we saw a really different group of folks. The people who had typically been sort of 20 or 30 votes that were always voting against things or voting for things that were really out there, are now some of the folks who are in the leadership in that particular caucus. And so we've seen the rise and influence of the Free State movement into our state legislature. That's been growing steadily over a number of years, but I think this is sort of the first year that I think we've seen it take a more formal influence, for lack of a better term. And we've seen that in the difference in the issue priorities that the legislature tackled. So it's not a surprise to see a Republican majority look at, doing business tax cuts in the state budget. That wouldn't surprise many people at all, right? But what has been different is some of the other things that we saw jammed into the budget and become part of the sort of issue priorities there. They've been far more conservative. And so that specifically, that manifested itself in a few of the different legislative battles we had this session. So the first category of that being, school privatization, school choice, public school choice. So the biggest piece of that being we had, where this had been rejected in both Democrat and Republican controlled legislatures before, we saw the inclusion in the budget of a school voucher program. So this is possibly the most expansive of its kind in the entire country, expansive and unaccountable. So this is the program that would send the state aid that would normally go to your school districts for a particular student, and it would send whatever they would be allocated to what they're called an education savings account, or education freedom accounts is what they're calling them, a voucher. And those accounts could be used for all sorts of types of educational expenses. And that's all governed by a third party entity that in the legislation is called a scholarship organization. This exists to a limited amount right now. When they built the tax credit scholarship several years ago, where businesses could get a credit for donating to the scholarship program. But now it's really expanding. And not only does it include a family who would take their child out of a public school, it also includes sending those payments to anyone who is currently, so they've already made the choice, homeschooling or sending their child to private or religious school. So we think that group in particular is going to be a really high take-up rate for this, because why wouldn't you? If you're already homeschooling your child or have made the decision to send your child to public school, or excuse me, to private school, it's free money. Why wouldn't you do it? And so this is going to be a new expense that we're all paying for when you pay your statewide property taxes. There's going to be a little piece of it that goes to that now. And that program is going to be starting this fall. The other part to it is that there's really very little accountability in there. And that's by design. There's not a lot governing the workings of the scholarship organization. And so we're very concerned about it. There is a small temporary aid to your district should you lose a child that sort of ramps down over a couple of years. But even that program goes away several years down the road. And the current qualifications for this program is you just have to be a K through 12 eligible student, and your family only in the first year, which I think is important, only in the first year has to have you have to be at or below 300% of the federal poverty level. So just to give you an idea, for a family of 4 right now, that's about $79,000 a year. But as we've seen in other states, a lot of times once these programs are in place, you can see what the next bill is going to be down the road. It's going to be, let's remove the cap. So we're looking at all kinds of ways to see if we can either challenge this or bring greater accountability to it. because it really is a sort of freewheeling program, and maybe one of the most consequential pieces of legislation that we've seen, in quite a while. It sort of remains to be seen just how limited or how big the program could potentially get. The other things we've seen on the privatizations, school choice end has been, the Learn Everywhere program, the program that requires extended learning opportunity credits that are approved by the state board, not your local board, that those are mandated for credit for graduation at the local level. That program has started once it finally got approval. And then you may remember from a couple of years ago when we were awarded a $46 million charter grant from the federal government, a very sizable grant that is intended to basically double the number of charters in the state, not contribute to their ongoing costs, but to expand it. So there's a lot of moving parts to what's going on in public education in New Hampshire in this arena of school choice and privatization. The other bill that I mention often too to sort of watch out for is there was a bill, House Bill 609, called Innovation Schools, which allows your local school board to apply to the State Board of Education for waivers on all kinds of administrative rules that they have under the Department of Education. So that could be pretty expansive. They do have to follow a process, and I'm happy to talk more in depth about that if there are questions about it. But if your local school board says they're going to be applying to be an innovation school, take a real close look at that, because it means they want to waive certain regulations they have to follow per the rules set for them by the state DOE, which are a lot of them. There's a lot of potential there for what they could do. So on the school funding side, it was also sort of a tale of two cities. On one hand, we saw the benefit of, the legislature put money into school districts so that they would not see any harm because of the larger than normal drop in enrollment due to the pandemic, for people pulling their kids out of school for the past pandemic year. So that goes both toward your school census and toward the free and reduced lunch counts that were not accurate. And that's actually good for the next 2 years. So your district, at least on that front of education funding, is held harmless. Now, overall, compared to the investment that was made last year, we are statewide, we are seeing a $25 million drop in comparison to last year. Some school districts, because they're using a slightly different formula, will see at or about, at or maybe even slightly above what they got last year. But there's 1 in 4 communities that are going to see less, in some cases substantially less. And that's especially if you live in a lot of the communities we often refer to as having lower than average, lower than median property values in the state. So I'm thinking of the Berlins and the Claremonts and the Rochesters and so forth. So in addition, with all the additional surplus they had this year, the legislature elected to do a $100 million one-time reduction in the statewide property tax. All that really is going to do for communities is going to it's going to disproportionately benefit those communities that tend to be more property wealthy than those that are. It will disproportionately help those communities. On the labor side of things, we were able to stop a lot of. This was one area where we had some defensive successes. We were able to stop right to work in the House, which was really important to maintain a group of Republicans in the House that are going to vote against anti-labor legislation. We saw a lot of those same Republicans defeat other bills that would affect collective bargaining for you all. So one that would have required your collective bargaining. If anybody's on their negotiating team, this bill would have said that your negotiation sessions would have had to have been public meetings under the right to know law. And so you would have had to notice your collective bargaining sessions, and you would have, the documents presumably would have been subject to public record. And so you can kind of imagine all of that, the dynamics that would create if you're negotiating with in a public meeting and you have the public attending. And then there was another one that would have delayed by at least 30 days the whole process of getting your contract to on the ballot for ratification by the town, and because it would have had to have been finalized and posted 30 days ahead of time, and that would have pushed your negotiation timeline back even further. Then just wrapping up on the summary of this year, obviously one of the more high profile things other than vouchers this year in the education was the inclusion in the budget of the what's often referred to as the divisive concepts law, and or as it was sort of revamped in the budget process, expansion of anti-discrimination law, but it really is this divisive concepts law with lipstick on it. It's not, this is, we're seeing this push in other states around the country in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the push for equity, inclusion, race, and gender. So I'm sure you've all heard about this. NEA New Hampshire has sought further guidance from the Attorney General and the Department of Education, sending a couple of letters, both asking further questions and also asserting the fact that based on the guidance the Attorney General's released, that we're asserting it is a very narrow law in how it can, pretty much every day we're getting more information about how this law is going to be applied. And if there are questions, happy to go into that even further, because it is a very important bill that, we've been worried is going to have a real chilling effect on public education, and, puts people's certifications and licenses on the line for violating it. So, and then, well, I'll bring up a couple more things. We can go back if there are questions about the summary on legislation. Next year, we're looking to we're waiting for the filing period to see what else is going to be coming down the line, but it is going to be an election year, and we have an opportunity to change this, to change the dynamic in Concord. There's a decent chance that the governor's doing something else, so there's going to be potentially an open governor's race on the line, we had success this year in electing another educator in the special election. Muriel Hall won a special election in Bow and Dunbarton very handily. Educators make terrific candidates for public office, so I would encourage you all to think about that. We have educators, NEA New Hampshire members who are serve in the legislature, serve on school boards, serve on city councils and select boards. municipalities are having their elections this fall, and in some cases their filing periods are now or coming up in September. We have a program that's supported through NEA, the national office, on helping members run for office if you're interested in that. And so please contact me if you are. And then, one of the key ways that we engage in elections is through our through AppleCore, through our PAC, because we can't use dues dollars to support the candidates who support our members and support public education. So I hope everybody can, if you don't contribute, you contribute to AppleCore. I'll put the link in the chat for making a donation. If you have the access to payroll deduction at your in your local, to do that, encourage members to do that, because that really is how we can support, especially I mentioned the electing one of our own members to the legislature. That's where that support can come from, is from our PAC. And in fact, one of the things that we have going on right now is a virtual road race to raise money for PAC. That's open through from now until September 7th. And so you can register for the race, you also make a contribution to AppleCore and get some exercise too. So again, we have an opportunity to sort of turn this around in 2022 with everything being up for election on the ballot. So that's something from every level, from school board, especially school board. That's sort of a new battleground in elected offices. There's actually a lot of money coming in from the national level to really sort of push and take over school boards, particularly around this issue of that we're seeing in the news a lot now with critical race theory and divisive concepts. There are people trying to take advantage of that on a political front with money. We saw that in Muriel's race in Bow and Dunbarton. We saw one, so everybody here knows there's 400 folks in the legislature. So this is one House race, and this one PAC put in $48,000 of money into this little race in New Hampshire. So they have a lot of money to spend. And that we're seeing that filter down lower and lower on the ballot, including places that may affect you all more on a day-to-day basis, like your local school board. So we'll be reaching out and doing more around that, particularly trying to work with local coalitions and allies to make sure that there's good candidates that are running for school boards, people who believe in public education, who don't believe in this kind of censorship we saw legislated in Concord, and then of course, as I said, we have the statewide elections coming up in 2022. So I'll pause there because I could keep going on and on and on, but I'd love to answer questions you have, comments, and I'll stop there and tell me what you got. See, Patrick.
Hi, Brian, I was wondering if, so my interpretation of the divisive concepts that came, are the guidelines for the divisive concepts that came out of the Attorney General's office in the DOE, is that it's pretty favorable to teachers, and the fact that it's fairly limited in it. The way that I interpret it, I'm wondering if you interpret it in a similar manner, is that unless you walk up to a student and say, hey, you're white or you're black or, and therefore you are inherently racist. Unless you do that, it really doesn't prevent us from, some of the fears were that we wouldn't be able to teach history, or even more specifically, because I think that the idea was, well, you'll still be able to teach history, even the people that were in favor that were saying that. But one of the things is, if you were teaching like a contemporary issues class, you couldn't mention, say, Black Lives Matter without raising the ire of the people that were trying to put that forth. But the guidelines that came out from the Attorney General's DOE sort of just say, unless you tell a kid that they're inherently racist because of the color of the skin, then you can really talk about anything. So that was my first thing that I thought was at least favorable from the guidelines. And the second thing is that a community member that's going to accuse a teacher or an educator of violating the divisive concepts language, it's not going to be litigated at the school level. It's going to go to, they have to file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. Did you see those as favorable, or are you still kind of really leery of how this is going to be played out?
Thanks for the question, Patrick. I think the really important ones. So the guidance, the frequently asked questions that the Attorney General's office released, I think a number of people were, obviously we don't like this law at all to begin with, but I think there were some encouraging pieces to that, specifically around the definition, how they defined inherent, and it was very limited, as you said, and so that prompted a sort of a series of positions that we sent back to the Attorney General, asserting what all that meant. But that when you're discussing these things in the context of the course of, as the law puts it, a larger course of academic instruction, that's allowable, and that simply having a student feel uncomfortable about a discussion that's happening in class doesn't violate the law. That was also helpful. What was said about what you can't do was just that you can't, you basically can't teach people to be racist, which none of you are doing. And then the second piece that you mentioned, which was unclear when when it was just the statute, was that a complaint would first be filed with the Human Rights Commission, and that's where the complaint would start, which would be against the school district. Obviously, an educator would be involved in the whole process of how the Human Rights Commission cases go, but it would be, the Mascoma School, district, not, Patrick Keefe. And now there is this sort of the second half of that process, which is, as we've been told from the Attorney General's office, that if there is a violation found through that process, then there is the code of conduct process that can happen at the DOE. But it was encouraging that it doesn't start with DOE, as you said, because that that seems like it could be a free-for-all. The concern still have with this is, like a lot of laws that are amorphous and not really super clear, is first, what do parents and communities think about this? How do they interpret it? Is the Human Rights Commission just going to get a flood of, well, they talked about this in school, and so I'm going to file a complaint? And how there may be some more rules coming around this specifically from the Human Rights Commission in terms of how they're going to handle these cases. But if you haven't seen the letter that our staff attorneys put together, I'm happy to get that around to people. I think it's important, but I would really also encourage, if you haven't heard from your, because you also have your school administrations to deal with and how they're going to be telling you, you know, that this law is going to get, you know, they have attorneys that are giving them guidance. And so we have also really been encouraging members to reach out to your administrations, ask about training that's coming up. They really should be training. So if you haven't done that, you know, I definitely encourage you to do that. And, you know, we're going to continue. This is as I mentioned in the Friday class last week, this is, there's a group of us in the staff that meet about this weekly to make sure that we're doing everything we can to, you know, help you all be in the best position possible. You know, with, you know, we got the guidance a couple weeks ago. You know, you're what, a week and a half, 2 weeks from you know, going back, and so so that you can feel confident about, you know, your instruction, your curriculum, you know, but at least until, you know, someone decides otherwise, that's how we're interpreting. And I think the letter really asserts a number of examples that we got from some of you in terms of some of the curriculum that you undertake. You know, at least we're saying, you know, this is allowable under the law. Hope that helps. It's going to be a little bit of a moving target still, I think, as we enter the school year. But keep looking out for more stuff from us.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Brian before we let him go? You're so thorough, Brian. It's hard to sometimes come up with questions because you kind of go through everything.
Oh, well, let me also in the chat, I will put, if you don't have it, my email, and this is also, and that's my email and my cell phone. So please, you know, if you have questions or, you know, please give me a call. One last thing I'll just mention, we are working hopefully on some proactive pieces of legislation for next year with both Democrats and Republicans. This is also our link to contribute to PAC. And this covers everything from school meals, improving school meal standards, and possibly also a bill related to universal school meals, to continuing to, you know, and then we'll also, you know, we probably also will have some more defensive battles to fight, as there are also a number of bills that the legislature held back this year, and they're going to start to relook at those in the fall. And next year we'll have redistricting and all sorts of things that it's going to be a busy year coming up. So also, if you don't get my, let me know if you don't get my, during the session, I do a weekly update. So if you don't get that, let me know. I know a lot of people take it and also distribute it sometimes as well amongst their own locals. So.
And Brian, they, in their packets, they have a page on Apple Core and all of that. So we did include the new flyer to them. So if you guys need help, it's in the white section right before goldenrod. New colors. All right. We would love to bring Brian back at different points and get this group together again, like for monthly meetings. And at some point, when Brian starts making all these asks of us as leaders within our locals in the state, then we'd like to bring Brian back so he can help us get through some of that information and find the best way to get it to our members. So I have a funny feeling you'll be seeing Brian with us later on this year. If he doesn't, when he has time, because it's going to get busy for him, but he usually makes time for us. So it's awesome. We love working with Brian. So any other quick questions before we have you meet Rick Trombley, who slid in under Becky's computer right now? So
thanks, Carolyn. And also, if you have upcoming meetings for your locals or regional meetings, I love coming to those, and happy to share any information you like focus on. The more the better. So
all right, thanks, Brian. You have a wonderful day, and we'll be in touch with you. How's that?
Sounds good. I hope to see you all in person next time.
That would be nice, huh? Someday. So thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, so Rick Trombley is our executive director. It's really not Becky Butler sitting over there. But we invited Rick in to kind of introduce himself and just talk to you a little bit. We try to bring in all the managers and all our leaders. So we'll let Rick chat with you for a minute or two.
Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? Isn't that how you're supposed to begin a Zoom meeting? Can you hear me? I thought that was now the law in New Hampshire. First of all, I want to thank Carolyn and Becky for pulling together the Jim Sweeney Leadership Academy. I know it's a pleasure for them to be able to do it and to meet leaders and to work with leaders. And it's also quite a bit of work to gather the information and line up folks to do it. So Carolyn and Becky, thanks for doing this for the association. And I want to thank all of you as well as you begin this journey down local leadership. Some of you are probably on the path. Others of you, it's brand new, but when Carolyn said I was going to speak for a minute or two, you all need to realize as you get to know me, it takes me 20 minutes to say just my name, and that I will never say anything in 12 words that I can say in 40. So you've got me for now, but thank you all. I'd like to start with telling you a little bit about myself and how I ended up here. I grew up in the town of Bosquen, graduated from Merrimack Valley High School, and went to the University of New Hampshire, where I majored in, of all things, classics, which are Latin and Greek. And in my senior year, I went to my advisor and said, what do I do with a degree in ancient Greek and Latin? This was in 1978. So while that seems like ancient history, it was not as ancient as my major. And he says, well, you can do two things. You can become a librarian or you can go to law school. And I made the wrong choice and went to law school. I practiced law for, 20-something years, 25-something years, still do a little bit of it here with folks. And I served in the legislature from 1978 through to 1996 in the House of Representatives. Took 2 years off and ran for the state Senate and accidentally won, and served 2 years in the Senate. And then after the voters looked at my voting record, they threw me out promptly. And so I left the Senate and was practicing law, and Dennis Murphy, the lobbyist for NEA, was retiring. He was becoming executive director for a couple of years, and he approached me in 2001 and said, would you be interested in working for the NEA, and it's a no-brainer working for teachers and public education employees, and I literally jumped at the chance to do it. I was the lobbyist until I believe around 2016. I'm not exactly sure. And I became the interim executive director for a year, and said to the board, look, because there was a vacancy, I would like to take the job, give me a year of probation. If I don't work out, or I don't like it, let me go back to being the lobbyist. And the board said, yeah, we can live with that. So I think it worked out for both the board and the association, and it worked out for me that I became the executive director. Executive directors in NEA land turn over quite frequently. If you consider my tenure as executive director, maybe 5 or 6 years, or a little bit longer than that, I'm in the top 10 in seniority in the country on executive directors. So there's frequent turnover in that position, but I will tell you, working with the board here and working with the membership has worked out very well, I think. So that's a little bit about me. I will reiterate the structure here at NEA New Hampshire so you understand it. And that is this, that NEA New Hampshire has a president elected by the members and has an executive director hired by the board. And I deal with staff issues. The UNISERV directors, you heard from Rachel, I believe, Carolyn, is that correct? You heard from Rachel this morning. We have 9 UNISERV directors. I'm in charge of them as a UNISERV manager. I oversee the management team. I work with governance to make sure that their policies are put in place. Megan and I have a good relationship in terms of sharing information, but I deal with staff. Governance issues, such as whether or not, and I'm going to pick a hot button because I know it's important to all of you. You know, we get a call all the time, where does NEA stand on COVID related issues? Those are set by the board. That's a policy decision by your elected board. But once they make a decision, it's my job to ensure that the staff understands what the policy is and how we enforce it and how we work for you. If you have a problem with a staff member, I would encourage you first to talk to the staff person. Most generally, your interaction is going to be with your UNISERV director. And if you have issues with them, if you can work them out, I think that's always the best thing to do. But ultimately, if it's a job performance type of issue, that would rise to my plate and not to Megan's. So I would deal with that and not Megan. That's how NEA is set up nationally. Every state has the executive director president relationship. You will be working as leaders in your locals. In NEA world, you have to think of it as the United States, which has the national organization and the state organization, but there are individual states and you are individual locals. Your local is going to experience situations that are unique to your local. Some of them may be politically based, some of them may be based with an administrator, some of them may be contract based. But whatever it is, you have that autonomy as a local leader to deal with those issues. NEA will not swoop in and say to you, here's the party line, this is what you need to do for your local, because we understand that the uniqueness of each local builds its character, and that what works in Hanover or Lebanon isn't going to work in Kingston or Merrimack or Bedford. It's diverse. So you have that freedom to do what you want to do without the state coming in and saying, you as a local leader must do this. We have at NEA New Hampshire an excellent staff. I feel that we've hired professionals to work with you and that they are good quality individuals. And that's because I hired them, quite frankly, most of them. So that's that. But we pay them well because we believe that we should expect that level of service. And that's a level of service that I will expect them to provide for you. Staff will give you their best advice. I'm going to tell you that now. And sometimes that's very frustrating. When I practiced law, I did lots of juvenile law and tons of divorces. And the hardest thing was explaining to someone, you have to make your choice. Here are your options. But staff cannot always deliver what you may want because there are considerations around the contract. For instance, there are times where I'll hear, well, you know, this UNICEF director didn't file a grievance and we wanted them to file a grievance. And there may be considerations for that. What we expect staff is to give you their best advice and their best guidance. Okay? We expect them to work with you. We expect them to work hard for you. We expect them to be available to you. They know these expectations and they should be fulfilled. If it comes to a level where it hits my plate, then I have to work within the staff here at NEA New Hampshire is unionized. We have a contract just like you do. And I have to work within the parameters of the contract to do what I need to do to remedy a situation. So that's how the NEA system works. Now, for practical reasons, I can't stress this enough. You're about to enter into a very tough job. The best thing you can do for yourself is build a team behind you. That's the best thing you can do. People that will help you, will guide you, and be honest with you in terms of what should we do for the benefit of the local. That is key. You can try to do it on your own, and some of you will do a fairly good job doing it on your own. I don't think it's the best way to go, particularly when we're looking at some of the challenges that Brian told you about. Dealing with the personalities within your local, the ramifications of a state law, and negotiating contracts, prosecuting grievances, and so on. So if there's one thing I think you take away, and I'm sure Becky and Carolyn would agree with this too, try to build a local team. We will help you do that. We will gladly help you do that, which leads me to my other point that I think is important is please reach out for help. Some things you will be able to handle rather routinely and get the job done and do it well and move on. Other things you're just gonna need help with. Maybe just getting advice on, hey, I've got this issue. What do I do with this? How do I deal with this? Ask us. You have your UD. Your UD should be your first point of contact. They have a specifically designated region with specifically designated locals. One of the big differences between the other teacher union, AFT, and NEA New Hampshire is that we believe having that specialist in the field dealing with all your issues, knowing what your issues are, is the model that works best to help you succeed as a local. Other unions will have someone who does just grievances for many different locals, or just does a contract negotiation. They fly in, they parachute in, they drop in, and then they leave, and things are turned over to someone else. We don't like that. We like the fact that you're going to have a UD who will know who you are and what you're facing. We think that's the best model that works for our members. So in that regard, the UD is your first contact. We have a communications director. I know that Carolyn and Becky gave you a breakdown of the organizational chart here at NEA. I think, you know, it's good to look at it to see who's under who and who's over who. But I think what's more important is if you look at it as a whole, that organizational chart, those are all your resources. The communications director, the professional development director, our IT person, our legal team. We have a superb legal team. I would put our lawyers up against anyone in this state. And they're all yours. So while that chart breaks it down into categories and levels of responsibility, what you need to do as local leaders is look at that as the map. Everybody on that map is available to you. Okay? So don't hesitate to ask. If you're like, oh, do I contact Megan? Do I call Rick? Our relationship is such that call either one of us. We'll sort out where it should go. The important thing is you feel that you have the support and the help and the assistance that you need, and that you get that best advice so that you can make the best decisions. So those, I think, are the 3 points that I wanted to leave with you today. Develop the local team, ask for help, and look at the organizational chart as a resource that is available to you en masse, not simply in just different categories. And feel comfortable saying, I've got a contract that needs to be ratified. Our communications department has the MUM program, the mobilization, organizing and messaging. I need help. I need a grant. How do I get it? We'll get you the answer. We'll get it for you. The worst thing you can do is not utilize the resources that you pay for. That's the best thing in the world. You pay for these resources. Please utilize them. I love going out and talking with local leaders. I'll bet you that Becky and Carolyn have already volunteered to go out and help you. Am I wrong, or is that the last pitch of the day? Yeah. They were going to say it after that, but I'll give you the preview, folks. They're available to help. Megan is. I do want to say one thing about calling in the president to deal with a local issue, which is we respect the autonomy of each local, and that sometimes circumstances develop in a local that the statewide association will say to you, you know, that's a local issue. Here's some suggestions on how you might be able to deal with it. But we are very cautious not to literally or figuratively impose our will on the members or how you want to run your local. Find your constitution and bylaws. Find them. If you don't have them, get them from your UD or UA, because so many times we'll get a call from a UD and says in X local, yeah, sorry about that, folks. Becky muted me with a long finger, a plastic finger, and she, so But your constitution and your bylaws are how you run your local. We've had issues such as a local would call up and said, we have a contested race for president. And we don't know how to go about conducting the election. Our first answer will be is check your bylaws and your constitution. If you don't have an answer, if you can't find it there, then we may say to you, you need to find out how you amend your bylaws and your constitution. In the meantime, you may be able to do this. So the value of those documents, that's the first place we're going to turn. Find them. If you can't put your hands on them, your UD or UA should have them. Some locals, if you don't have them, we've got to help you draw them up. And we have templates for that. But you will make the decision on how you want to run your local in terms of, we're not going to say to you, you have to have a 2-year term or 1-year term for offices or whatever. It's like, how do you want to do it? We can plug the number in for you and we'll help do that. One final point is, as you are experiencing changes in the classroom, NEA is experiencing some changes here. We've obviously had to make adjustments because of COVID, and we're exploring continuing making changes to assist the members. We now have the online membership where non-members can go online and join electronically. I personally cannot run a computer. I can barely operate my phone. And even on days, that's a struggle. Okay, so I'm just telling you, when somebody says to me, oh, our members would prefer to join online, I'm like, well, that's amazing. That's amazing. One of these days I'll learn how to order from Amazon, but I don't know yet. So, but we're making accommodations for you to make things easier. I think we're going to start going, we're exploring electronic bills because some members have said, I don't want 192 pages to check off names. I can do it electronically. So we're making changes. You'll hear about those. George Strout's our communications director. Sometimes you'll get statements of policy from him. Many times you'll get communications from him outlining changes that we're making here at NEA New Hampshire. One example of a change that we made that's been very successful, and let me tell you this to impress upon you, if you want your dues to go down, if your members say to you, I need my dues to go down, there is one surefire, painless way to lower dues. That is to increase membership in your locals. I will tell you that. If we increase membership, we don't have to make cuts to a budget. We can just reduce your dues. So we're working on programs to increase membership. And one we have is the early enrollee program, which allows people to join now. And they don't become, they become a member now, and they get certain benefits now, but beginning September 1st, they promise to join NEA New Hampshire and pay their share of dues. We've enrolled 90 people, new members, using that program. Join now, pay later, and get the benefits now. We work every day to retain members and to recruit new members. And I can't stress to you enough that when you hear from members, I wish dues would go down, you just simply say, if we get more people, they will go down. If we get more people, they will go down. I think those are sort of the highlights that I wanted to touch with you informally today. So at this point, Carolyn and Becky, I will turn it back to you. If you have any questions, If you don't, yeah, right. Carolyn whispered, "Don't ask." If you want to, Carolyn and Becky, I don't mind answering any of them now for the good of the order. My eyesight is awful, so if you have any questions for me now, if you want to open it up and ask the question, I'll answer it for the good of the order. No questions? All right, I'm not one of these people that sits around and looks at a Zoom meeting and waits for somebody to ask a question. So I'm going to take that as I did a thorough, complete, and excellent job, and that I answered every possible question you could have from the beginning of time until the end of time. So Becky and Carolyn, thank you again very much. And thank you all for what you're doing for the association, but also for what you're doing for kids. You're facing a tough time. And we really appreciate that. So thank you. Great. Yep.
Sorry, I turned my speakers back up and I forgot to unmute myself. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thank you.
So he actually kind of gave us a perfect segue into our last few things, because believe it or not, you only have like 18 minutes left with Becky and I for this week. And then we truly are always available. You have our contact information. I think we're in the book somewhere at the beginning of the book. So really, truly feel free to reach out. If not to your UDs, if you just have a quick question of like, how would you do this? How have you ever experienced that? It would be great. But the final competency and section we wanted to kind of talk to you guys about was organizing, which is membership. Organizing always sounds scary to me. So I prefer the term membership, because as local leaders, it is up to us to try to increase membership. We don't have to do it alone. You want like a membership type person, and sometimes the vice presidents end up being like the membership chair. Okay, for those of you who have them, for those of you who don't, find a friend that's willing to help. Okay, that seems to be the general theme, and then slowly reel them in to give them a title. Okay, in your binder, in the white section, there is, it's not far before the yellow, there's the NEA's guide to new hire orientations. And so we put this in there, excuse me, just as like sample letters and ideas for you to think of the first people you sort of want to reach out to are the people who are coming into your district now. And a lot of us have like the new teachers, or a lot of times it's new teachers. I don't know what they do with the ESPs so much. This is where being a teacher, I don't have all those answers, but you have the orientation days. So this is a chance where you want to ask to be invited in just to speak to them and just to chat with them about what your association is and who you are. And so like, as you go through this little guide, it'll give you like gain access to your new hire orientations, work with the district. Okay, try to get in there for one of their lunches and eat lunch with them. Create a little mini orientation for people who do join. And then, sometimes you can negotiate it into your contract of like building in, like, we are gonna get the names of those people, we are entitled to all of that, which you are anyways. But build a potential membership list, prepare for orientation day. A lot of locals, if they have money in their local budget, will do little welcome back bags for people. And you can put things as simple as, I helped the Litchfield support staff organize themselves a few years back, and they were like, we have no money. So they literally went out and brought little brown lunch bags and they put lifesavers in them. And they put a couple of other little like candy things in there. And they just wrote little messages of encouragement and thanked them for everything that they do. I know we've done things for the teachers, such as water bottles or coffee mugs. We had money in our budget that year. We've done things like apples. One year we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't get a raise the year before. So we went out and bought lottery tickets, gave everybody a $1 lottery ticket and said, you're worth $1 million to us. Good luck. I think the highest anybody won was like $20, but somebody went home and bought like a pizza that day. It was like for one, but you know, there's little things you can do to welcome back your current members and then welcome in your newer members. Try to set up, I know in Litchfield, we do this, we set up an association table. So as they come in and everybody's coming back, we have them come in and check in with us and sign in with us. And it's a chance. And traditionally Litchfield has like officers around there. Sometimes I'll go and hang around and we just answer questions about the association for the new people. We usually try to help them fill out forms right then and there. Like, because hopefully we've given the forms out. We do now have online membership, which is wonderful. But, you know, sometimes just asking somebody to join isn't enough because they turn around to you and they say, why? What's in it for me? We've talked about a little bit this week, like, why should I join? It was a few years back, somebody emailed me and they're like, Carolyn, you're chair of membership. I'm meeting with like 13, 15 new teachers and they're going to ask me, why should I join? What are your top like 5 reasons to join? So I just did it off the top of my head. Apparently I said all the right things. I got 13 out of 15 that day. So I'm pretty good at the membership thing. It's because I've been doing it. I've been on the committee for 1,000,000 years. So, you know, find out what's important to you. Like, why are you a member? What is the importance? And one of the things that NEA New Hampshire can do is draft messages to stress why it's important to join. Member benefits is a great thing. You can get your money back if you play your cards right and do things with member benefits. And Jeff Kanarowski and Mike Riley love coming out and meeting with locals. They can do it virtually. They can do it any way you want. Danielle, did you have a question? You did? Did I answer it or no?
What were your 5 reasons?
Oh gosh. So I don't even remember now, and they may have changed. Having a voice and being able to make a difference and change, like for negotiations was one. Member benefits was another one. I liked the pet insurance. Like it just like at the time I had dogs, I had that. I can't even remember what my top 5 were. I know I'm looking at Becky like, I don't know if she wasn't in my head. If I had to do it now, those are the member benefits is huge. Having a voice is huge, making a difference in my students' lives. And you could do that. I can send everybody my 5 once I find them, but like my brain is thinking something else right now. So I can't come up with my 5. Like I can't transition over. I'm not in school mode. I'm still half in summer mode right now. So my thoughts are not always cohesive. But let me keep thinking. And Becky's probably going to think and add hers in as she goes along. One of the things that so when you go and talk to people about joining and you talk to people about why maybe you have a lot of members, but they don't do anything. It's the apathy. Like it's the same handful of people doing everything. So one of the things we talk about is the story of self. And it's when you sell it. So I'm reading like, yeah, people are meeting with their new teachers next week and like, it's hard to sell these things, but approach it from a personal point of reference. So like when you talk about like your story of yourself, how did you get involved? why did you get involved? So I use different stories for different reasons. So my story of getting involved was the elementary school was having issues way back when I started teaching late 1980s with mold and mildew. It was literally growing on the floors because they didn't reinstall the tile properly. I will tell you, my father was building supervisor of building and grounds. So like he was a custodian, he was a maintenance guy. I knew a lot of things that most teachers, I've been inside a boiler, not lit, obviously, but I'll throw that in there. But I've been inside a boiler. I've done I used to do building checks for them. I used to hang out with my dad a lot. So I knew things, and I knew that they hadn't installed it properly. So when we got back, it was very humid. And so we had issues with mold growing through it. And I would go home and talk to my dad. I'm like, this is just wrong. And because somebody knew I had that connection with like custodial things and people in my family being custodians, that's how they actually roped me into becoming vice president, because they wanted somebody with a voice. They wanted somebody that could speak and sound like they knew what they were talking about. I'd go home and ask my dad, like, Dad, how do I approach this? Thank God for him. So that was how I got involved. So there are times where if I'm trying to get current members involved in something, I'll use a story like that. I've used stories about my mom, taking care of my mom who had Alzheimer's. She lived with me for her last year and a half, I guess, with Alzheimer's. She became nocturnal. That was awful. Nothing worse than teaching all day, going home, taking care of the family, and then staying up with her like most of the night. So like how to run on 2 hours of sleep, I got you covered. It was difficult, but that taught me a lot about patience. And I didn't think I was a very patient person, and I'm still not. Patrick's gonna laugh and go, she's not. We work in the same district, but it did teach me some new things about myself. So sometimes I use that story. So picking the right story for who you're talking to is an important piece. And so we wanted to tie this back to your values. Becky brought us through, some of us unwillingly, but brought us through trying to learn more about ourselves and what are truly our values. So when you think about a story of self and you're thinking about like who you are, why you do what you do, think about courage, because you are courageous people, but think about those last three values that you listed. Why are those the three? There's a story behind each and every one of those words. Use things like that, but you gotta like put yourself out there. I am not a great sharer. There's a lot of people who know like what I do for a living. They know certain things, but they really don't know me. I tend to be very private on my personal life. I like to keep it that way. I will share exactly what I want and then nothing more. It's just not because one of my values is trust. And so until I completely trust you, then I will let you in. But there's stories behind everything. Try to use those when you're doing this. I'm still thinking of how to sell it.
Maybe I can jump in. We were talking yesterday about how we had someone had a member that, or an educator, or it was a support personnel or something like that, who said, I have somebody who wants to join, but it's too expensive for them. So I'm going to go back to member benefits and say, well, you know what, sit down with that person, have them call up the insurance company, California Casualty, and get a quote on going with them for your auto insurance and your home insurance. If you make a savings by doing that, then maybe they can afford to be a member at that point because they were able to find a cost saving somewhere else. I also mentioned something about doing maybe you have a bulleted list, but a history tour through your contract. I will tell you, we're talking about stories of self. I have my own medical issues going on right now. And if it were not for my union and the people that have worked hard to make sure they weren't stripping away our health insurance, or when it comes to long-term disability or medical leave or all those things, those are protections in our contract that, so I can still be employed by the school district and get the things that I need. I think it's, let's see what else. So member benefits, history tour. Oh, there's something else. If you need a lawyer for anything,
That was one.
whether it's real estate, whether it's divorce or whatever it has, NEA has a list of lawyers that will offer you a discount for any service that they provide, because you are an NEA member, and you just need to search that out and find out who those people are. That's something else. Yeah, there's the $1 million protection, also being a member, those kinds of things. But I'm sure I have more, but that's what's coming. That's what I'm thinking of right now. Those are several things. Is that good, Carolyn?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I was trying to find the list that I made, because I actually put it in a document, and I can't find it, but I did, like, as you were talking, it was the liability insurance is a big thing for people. It was a legal representation for me, having a voice, the member benefits. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the fifth one was.
There's also the support that, Megan and other executive board members have with, Megan routinely will go or listen into the Commissioner of Education to know what's coming on down there. So, she's fighting for teachers' rights in that capacity too. And that's something that is another benefit of being a member. So yeah.
You want to do JSLA while you're
Yeah.
Ed communities?
Ed communities. So unless anyone has any more questions, I wanted to talk to you really quick about Ed communities. It's in the white section also, right before that guide that Carolyn was talking about new hire orientations. There's a page right before it called, I don't know, it's very white over in this corner, but the Ed communities is a great way to stay in contact with us. We can upload information also, like Janice's PowerPoint presentation from yesterday. That's something that we put on Ed communities. When Carolyn and I offer support and workshops during the school year, we'll notify you through Ed communities for that. It's an easy way just to stay connected with one another. In order to join, it tells you right on that page how to join. We've already accepted 2 people already into the Ed communities group that we have. So, I think that's it for Ed communities. Yeah.
Oops, there we go. All right. So every year we've done this, and Becky and I, this is our 3rd year doing this together. I had done it previously in other years, but one of the things that we always struggle with is staying in touch with all of you, because we're both full-time educators. And as the school year begins, everyone's like, yeah, we'll like stay in touch, and we'll meet once a month, and we'll do this and the other things. So we're kind of doing this a little differently this year. The expectation is that we will meet with you all together, the class of 2021, as best we can, once a month. But it's not just a quick check-in. We want to offer you little mini trainings that go on. So for example, when you start to get your first bill from NEA, it's a little, if you've never seen one, or if you have seen one, they're a little confusing to read. So what we want to do is once you get the first bill, we want to meet with you for a half hour and have Janice there and help explain how to read the bill. Because if you don't understand what you're looking at, then I don't see how you can reconcile your membership. Okay. As we start making asks and as the legislative bills start to roll in, we want to have Brian back and kind of talk about these things and help you understand and know we make a lot of asks of our local presidents, like, you know, get your membership fired up about this. So we want to be able to help you walk through some of that at the beginning of the legislative season. We want to, as if you're negotiating contracts and now you need to sell that contract to the community, like that's a job in itself for a lot of us. So we want to do like a mini mom training and have our communications director come in. And so we're in the process of building like a mini calendar, but we don't want to, we almost want to force you to come back and see us because one, we just think you're really cool. Like this is like, we just love hanging out with you guys. Like this, you guys have asked a lot of really good questions. And when you leave, you're going to have a lot more. So we want to keep in touch with you for just like the rest of the year and just remind you and give you things as they're coming up. This is what you should be doing. This is what you need to do. And it's hard. It's hard to be, I'm not going to lie. It's hard to be a local leader and to do your job in whatever capacity you are in your school. It's a balancing act. You're going to need help. Let us help you. Let us be the people that help guide you and remind you to do different things. We're probably going to send a survey to all of you, hopefully later this week, asking you this because we're like, okay, we got to pick a day and a time. So we're going to ask you for your best day of the week and your best time. So, and then we will fit it in as best we can, but we're going to send you a schedule. So you'll know, like in September, we want to do this. This is what it is. This is the time. So you can plan around that, but we'll at least ask you, like for different options of when to meet. Like if Wednesdays is always good for Becky and I, but if it's bad for everybody else, and that's a stupid day to do it just because it's convenient for us. Like because we need you there to make this happen. So we will hang around as we always do. If people have more questions or just want to chat for a little bit, that's fine. But I will first say thank you. You guys have been a wonderful class of 2021 and you're not done with us, but we wish you the best of luck, both in your schools and as local leaders, but please, please, please reach out. We love to hear stories, mostly success stories, but if it's not so successful, we're still here for you. We'll help you all along the way. You want to say thank you?
Yep. I also want to thank you, everybody, for coming in. Really appreciate you being here, being as engaged as you have been. It truly means a lot to Carolyn and I. And when I go home at the end of the day, I am just glad to be hanging out with all of you. It really fills my bucket up. I enjoy working with new leaders, and I always want to be the one to help you problem solve and see you successful. So, so thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. Yeah, have a nice day.
Well, on my part, you guys nailed it.
Thank you.
And it was very informative and very assuring. Very happy about this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Can't wait for our monthly meeting next month. Have a great beginning of the school year.
Oops. Hold on,
Can I
we
ask-
need, go ahead.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Is this the parking lot? Where we ask questions?
Yeah.
So is